Hello everyone, this is Anime Oracles and today's topic is related to one of the most well-regarded index villains out there. Yes folks, I am referring to one of the most popular heroines of modern index, and that is Othinus. First, a quick shout out, the video will contain spoilers for the first half of NT, so please consider first reading the novels in case you don't like to be spoiled and then maybe come back to the video. And now without further ado, let's dive in. Othinus' tenure as antagonist in the narrative of Index begins as soon as the World War III arc ends, and the second set of novels, that is the New Testament novels, begin. As with most things in Index, Othinus is also heavily tied to religious lore, and to be more specific, she is Odin from Norse mythology. Othinus is the Latin name for Odin, and essentially an alternative form of reading the name. If one were to curate the various things Odin is associated with, then he is the Norse god of war, betrayal, poetry, wisdom, healing, sorcery, and frenzy. Yes, that's quite a lot. Her epithet in Index is One-Eyed Othinus, which ties deeply to her history that we will get to in a minute. During the Gremlin story arc of Index, that is from NT1 to NT10, she got introduced as a major adversary and an antagonist who causes havoc and is widely responsible for terrorist activities in the events that drive the world into a corner. Her primary motive, as perceived by the protagonists, boiled down to gathering ingredients for manufacturing the legendary spear Gungnir. According to Oleras, Gungnir is something Othinus requires to become a full magic god and mitigate the 50-50 restrictions that she has at the moment, which is quite fitting considering Gungnir is the fabled weapon that is always able to hit its target. The 50% restriction here means that her probability of success at any moment for anything she does is 50, meaning despite being powerful enough to pull off crazy feats like single-handedly crushing Touma's mysterious invisible thing that came out when she ripped off his arm, her rate of success of using her own power can backfire at any moment. Here's a reminder that the eldritch entity inside Touma's hand has been hinted to be easily powerful enough to take out Fiamma and had no issue tearing down the swirl of otherworldly energy surrounding Misaka 5.3. So actually introducing Othinus into the game in that point in the story, or for that matter magic gods in general, is a huge power scaling factor. Now coming back to Othinus, aside from the clear benefits of getting rid of the 50% limiter, there's also a deeper reason why Othinus took these set of actions. And most of it is not related to power hunger, but rather a deep-seated reason to return to one's own world. And that motive and the underlying reason behind it will be the primary focus of this video. To begin, let's first look at the history of Odin. If we trace the beginnings of Norse mythos, the origin speaks of a formless and shapeless mist world and a fire world that is always burning. There was Niflheim to the north, that is the dark world, and 11 poisonous rivers cut through the mist, all originating from the same source, a maelstrom called Hvergelmir. To the south was Muspel, which was always burning. In the middle there was a void, and this is where, due to the interactions of fire and ice, Ymir and other strange creatures like a hornless cow were born. Ymir received nourishment from the cow and gave birth to a man and a woman, while the cow licked the ice and a man was carved out of this. He was called Buri, and he picked a wife from the children of Ymir, and via them Bor was born, who took a giant named Bestla as wife, and finally Odin and his two brothers Vili and Ve were born. This is the origin of Odin. And slowly and gradually, after he began developing a sense of self, the brothers realized that in order for civilization to happen, they had to get rid of Ymir, since they were simply stuck in the middle with fire at one end and cold at the other end. So Ymir was slain in order for the world to prosper. All three brothers were responsible for creating and crafting humans, and Odin breathed life into them. And since Odin basically gave life to the very first humans, which led to civilization, he is called the All-Father. Norse mythology is polytheistic in nature, which, like Kamaji mentioned in 99 itself, involves the worship of many gods, and a lot of the times these gods have flaws similar to human beings. This is a very important piece of information to note because of all the issues Othinus was facing, loneliness was the biggest of them. If we look at the core characteristics of Odin from the many stories featured in Norse mythology, what sets him apart from his fellow Norse gods is an unquenchable desire, one could say, of betterment, of wanting knowledge, wisdom, and the ability to foresee even events into the future. And he would go to great lengths to achieve this. Odin greatly craved knowledge. Despite being a god, he wasn't omniscient, so he approached the well of Erd, the water of which contained wisdom. He asked Mimir, the guardian, for a sip, but he was asked to sacrifice his eye in return, which he willingly did so. In another story, 3 shrewd and powerful maidens called Norns carved runes on Yggdrasil, which dictated the fate of the 9 worlds of Norse. Odin was greatly interested to interpret the runes and was dismayed when he couldn't. He knew that the runes revealed themselves to whoever was considered worthy, so Odin hanged himself on the Yggdrasil tree, used a spear to pierce himself, and refused to eat or drink anything or take any help from anyone for 9 days and 9 nights. Only after putting up with such excruciating pain were the runes revealed to him. I think this story is part of why I don't really mind Othinus knowing about new and innovative tech in stories like GT4, despite the larger fandom taking issues with it. I suppose it would have been great to include a couple of scenes of her looking up information, but since you don't really have to hang yourself from Yggdrasil or thankfully not sacrifice your eye for wisdom in this day and age, I guess Kamachi didn't find it necessary. We definitely, however, do see the do-or-die tendencies in Othinus as well though. She is relentless, conniving and meticulous. So why exactly did she fall apart in 99? My interpretation of the events as well as what's directly stated in the narrative is mental exhaustion. But why would someone who so valiantly sought out knowledge be mentally spent? The answer is isolation. Not physically, but a mental discord with the people around her. In real life, whenever a leadership position is examined, especially ones of the top level of executives, loneliness seems to be a given. In fact, some even consider it necessary, whether it be a price for success or simply a mandatory requirement like meditation is for spirituality. People do not exactly consider leaders being lonely an odd occurrence. One must note, loneliness doesn't necessarily get solved by having lots of comrades around a person. In fact, assuming Othinus 100% shares the exact same details in her backstory as real-life Odin, then she had to be surrounded by people who highly revered her. What actually causes loneliness is the lack of meaningful connection. Not having a person around you who you can connect to can be highly detrimental to one's mental health. And Odin is billions of years old. You can only imagine the cumulative effect. In the 2 stories I mentioned, we don't really see anyone being as enthusiastic as Odin about knowledge. Nor do we see anyone who is willing to go through similar trials for expertise in some other fields as well. Therefore, my personal interpretation is Odin rarely had people he could closely relate to or people who would understand his reasons for doing what he did. This finally changes when we have the confrontation between Touma and Othinus. By laying out phase on top of phase, she endlessly changed the landscape and circumstances of the various worlds she created while trying to find her way back to her own world. For Touma, during his struggle with Othinus, he essentially experienced the same issues she was going through, experiencing phase after phase but never quite returning to his world. Due to him experiencing being a stranger in the worlds and among people he knew all his life, he is the only one who understood what Othinus was going through and actually had first-hand experience. This allowed him to deduce the true motives of Othinus and finally offer up his right hand in his dying moments after getting annihilated. Perhaps what Othinus was looking for wasn't exactly the original world. Rather than familiarity, what she sought after was a unique experience of being understood. It isn't strange for people looking for something to want to trace back to their roots. For Othinus, this manifested as wanting to find a way back to her world, but even in her own world, she never quite had a companion who could understand her drives, desires, and unique viewpoint the way Touma did. And even if one could hazard a guess, it still remains largely foreign without personal experience. Othinus' motives are hinted at subtly via her refusal to kill off Touma despite always possessing the capacity to do so. Honestly, this behavior is not that much different from how teenagers sometimes throw tantrums and do things that prove counterproductive to what they truly want. And more often than not, they just want to be understood. In addition to this, Odin strongly has the wanderer motif. Someone who travels places and even realms in search of knowledge and experiences. Tolkien cited Gandalf's character in the Lord of Rings saga was strongly influenced by this. This fits Othinus' wandering through the worlds wanting to be understood very well. It's a strongly humanized motive for a god, and it works due to the fact that polytheistic gods often have flaws like humans. I'd say in many ways, Othinus' conflict is actually quite similar to Griffith's conflict and him not being able to form adequately meaningful relationships with the rest of the Band of the Hawk. That is, until Guts came around. Like the previous struggles of Odin, this was also quite excruciating as it needed billions of years until the search ended, while also making life hell for someone else like Touma. Now I don't really know whether or not it's intentional, but the 3 key worlds Othinus constructed for mentally sabotaging Touma actually hold a very strong resemblance with statements from Dante's Inferno. Through me you go into a city of weeping, through me you go into eternal pain, through me you go amongst the lost people. In my humble opinion, one could connect the city of weeping to the Alpha world, eternal pain and walking amongst the lost people as an amalgamation of beta and omega easily. I know New Testament volume 9 literally mentions infinite hells, but it's still pretty awesome to possibly have a mild sort of reference to Dante's Inferno. Is it intentional? Who knows? Us Index fans get to enjoy plenty of nuances like that. And who knows, maybe Kamachi will pull a stunt and actually make it relevant. I hope until then, we enjoy the musings. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you want more, and have a nice day.